World War II. I mean, the scale is just immense, right? It touched almost everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere. A true global conflict.
And within that huge struggle, there were these key moments, these turning points where you can really see the tide shifting against the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan.
Yes, specific events where the momentum clearly changed hands.
So that's what we're diving into today. We want to look closely at those critical junctures, understand what made them so decisive in, well, in the Allies eventually winning.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's kick off with an event that really pulled a major power into the thick of it. Pearl Harbor.
Ah, yes, December 1941. The surprise attack by Japan on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii. That was, well, it was a profound shock.
Before that, the U.S. was trying hard to stay out of the fighting, weren't they? Mostly.
Largely, yes. There was lend-lease and support, but no direct combat involvement on a large scale. Pearl Harbor just erased that hesitation overnight. The impact on the American public was immediate.
It's quite something to picture. One day, striving for neutrality the next. Fully committed to a world war.
Hmm.
And that commitment wasn't just soldiers, right? It meant unlocking America's industrial power.
Exactly. The sheer capacity to build ships, aircraft, tanks, everything that was now thrown behind the Allies, not just in the Pacific, but in Europe, too.
It must have been a massive boost for the Allied forces already fighting.
Oh, undoubtedly. It was like adding a powerhouse player to the team, providing immense resources and manpower just when things were looking incredibly tough. A huge shift in the balance of resources.
Okay, so fast forward just about 6 months. We're in the Pacific again, and there's another major clash at sea, Midway.
The Battle of Midway, June 1942. This one was really decisive for the U.S. Navy. Japan had been riding a wave of victories.
Right, they seemed unstoppable early on.
They did, and they aimed to capture Midway Atoll, a key strategic point. But, and this is crucial, U.S. intelligence had cracked Japanese codes.
And they knew the attack was coming.
They had a very good idea. They set an ambush. And the result was, well, devastating for the Japanese Navy.
Devastating how? What were the main losses?
The big one was aircraft carriers. Japan lost 4 of their main fleet carriers in that single battle.
4. Wow. In the Pacific, carriers were everything, weren't they?
They were the key to projecting power over those vast ocean distances. Losing 4 carriers, plus experienced pilots and aircraft, was a blow Japan's Navy never fully recovered from.
So Midway basically stopped their expansion, put them on the back foot.
Yes, precisely. It halted the seemingly relentless Japanese advance across the Pacific. They lost the strategic initiative and were forced onto the defensive. It really marked the high water mark for Japan.
A critical turning point then. But stopping the advance is one thing, pushing back is another. That brings us to Guadalcanal, right?
Guadalcanal, starting later in 42 and running into 43, this was different. This was the first major Allied offensive operation against Japan in the Pacific.
So the Allies are starting to take the fight to them now.
Exactly, and it marked the real beginning of the strategy we call island hopping.
Ah, right. Island hopping. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. Instead of trying to conquer every single island Japan held, which would have been incredibly costly and slow.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
It would have been. So the Allies decided to strategically select key islands, islands that had airfields or good harbor locations, or were vital for cutting enemy supply lines.
And Guadalcanal was one of those key islands.
It absolutely was. Securing it, despite a brutal, long campaign fought on land, at sea, and in the air, gave the Allies a crucial base in the Solomon Islands. It disrupted Japanese movements and started that long, hard push towards Japan itself.
So a tough fight, but strategically vital for starting the rollback.
Okay, let's shift theaters now, over to Europe and the Eastern Front. Stalingrad.
The Battle of Stalingrad.
Yeah.
Late 42 into early 43. Just epic in scale and ferocity, one of the absolute bloodiest battles in human history.
And strategically, it was the high water mark for Germany on the Eastern Front. They pushed deep into the Soviet Union, aiming to capture the city named after Stalin himself and secure oil fields further south.
But the Soviets held on.
They held on with unbelievable tenacity in the ruins of the city. And then they did something remarkable. They launched a huge counteroffensive, Operation Uranus.
What did that do?
It encircled the entire German Sixth Army, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, trapping them inside Stalingrad. After horrific winter fighting, they were forced to surrender.
The whole army gone.
Essentially, yes, a catastrophic defeat for Germany. Militarily, it was a massive loss of manpower and equipment. Psychologically, it shattered the myth of German invincibility.
So Stalingrad wasn't just stopping the Germans, it was the beginning of the end for them on the Eastern Front.
Absolutely. From Stalingrad onwards, the strategic initiative was firmly with the Soviets. They began that relentless drive westwards, pushing the Germans back towards Berlin, a massive turning point.
Okay, so Soviets pushing from the east. Let's jump forward a bit to late 1944, early 45, on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge.
Right, Hitler's last big gamble in the West. A surprise German offensive launched through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg during a really harsh winter.
Trying to split the Allied armies.
Exactly. They aimed to punch through, reach the port of Antwerp, cut off Allied supplies, and maybe force a separate peace. They achieved surprise, created that famous bulge in the Allied lines.
It must have been a shock for the Allies.
It was, and the fighting was incredibly fierce, especially in freezing conditions. But crucial Allied units, like the paratroopers holding Bastogne, refused to break.
They held the line.
They did, and eventually the Allied counterattacks, combined with German fuel shortages and losses, pushed the Germans back.
So the gamble failed.
It failed, and at a terrible cost for Germany. They threw in many of their last reserves, tanks, experienced troops, fuel. Losing the Battle of the Bulge severely weakened their ability to defend Germany itself and just hastened the end on the Western Front.
These huge battles are clearly turning points. But sometimes other kinds of events shift things too, maybe more psychologically, like the Bataan Death March.
Ah, yes. That was earlier, 1942, after the Philippines fell to the Japanese. Not a battle, but a horrific atrocity.
What actually happened?
Tens of thousands of American and Filipino prisoners of war were forced by the Japanese military to march 65 miles under the most brutal conditions imaginable: starvation, dehydration, disease, beatings, executions.
It sounds just appalling.
It was. Thousands died on the march. While it wasn't a direct military turning point like Midway or Stalingrad, the news of this brutality had a profound effect back in the United States.
How so?
It absolutely horrified the American public. It fueled this sense of righteous anger and strengthened the national resolve to see the war through against Japan, no matter the cost. It became a symbol of Japanese cruelty and a powerful motivator.
A different kind of turning point, then, focused on morale and determination. You mentioned island hopping earlier when we discussed Guadalcanal. Can we unpack that strategy a bit more? It seems key to the Pacific War.
Definitely. Island hopping, or leapfrogging as it was sometimes called, was fundamental to the Allied victory in the Pacific. The Pacific is just vast.
Huge distances between islands.
Exactly. And Japan had fortified many islands very heavily. Trying to take every single one would have taken forever and cost countless lives.
So the idea was to be selective.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Identify islands that were strategically valuable. Maybe they had a good spot for an airfield to base bombers or a deep water harbor for the fleet. You'd concentrate your forces, capture that island.
And bypass the ones in between.
Right. Bypass the heavily defended but perhaps less strategically crucial islands. Capturing the key ones allowed the Allies to build forward bases, project air power further, and crucially cut the supply lines to those bypassed Japanese garrisons, leaving them to wither on the vine.
Clever.
Yeah.
Efficient in a brutal sort of way.
It was a way to manage the immense scale of the Pacific theater and maintain momentum towards Japan itself.
Okay, let's hop back to 1942 again, but this time, North Africa. The Battle of El Alamein. Why was that significant?
El Alamein, fought in Egypt in the autumn of 1942, was a major turning point in the North African campaign. British Commonwealth forces, led by Montgomery, faced Rommel's German-Italian Panzer Army Africa.
Rommel, the Desert Fox. He'd had a lot of success up to that point, hadn't he?
He had. His forces had pushed deep into Egypt, threatening Alexandria and, critically, the Suez Canal.
And the Suez Canal was vital.
Absolutely vital for the Allies. It was the main shipping route connecting Britain with India, the Far East, and crucially, Middle Eastern oil supplies. Axis control of the Suez would have been a strategic disaster.
So El Alamein stopped that threat.
Decisively, the British victory halted the Axis advance, secured the Suez Canal, and really turned the tide in North Africa. It boosted Allied morale enormously after a string of defeats.
And it had knock-on effects too, didn't it?
Yes, the victory at El Alamein, along with the nearly simultaneous Allied landings in Northwest Africa, Operation Torch, eventually squeezed the Axis forces out of Africa entirely. This cleared the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily and then Italy, opening another front against Nazi Germany in southern Europe.
So North Africa led directly to fighting in Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, fast forward again to 1944, the big one in Western Europe, D-Day.
June 6th, 1944. Operation Overlords. the Allied landings on the beaches of Normandy in France. Just an incredible feat of planning, logistics, and bravery.
The largest amphibious invasion in history, right?
By far. The goal was to breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall, establish a beachhead, and begin the liberation of France and Western Europe from Nazi occupation.
The start of the end in the West, really.
It was the beginning of the main ground campaign to defeat Germany in the West. It opened that long-awaited second front that Stalin had been demanding.
Why was that second front so important?
It forced Germany to divert huge amounts of troops, tanks, and resources away from the Eastern Front to fight the Americans, British, Canadians, and other allies in France. Fighting a major war on two fronts stretched German resources to the breaking point and significantly hastened their collapse. D-Day was absolutely pivotal.
All these battles, these strategies, these sacrifices, they all led, ultimately, in Europe at least, to VE Day.
Victory in Europe Day, May 8th, 1945, the formal, unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany.
After Berlin had fallen to the Soviets.
Yes, after Hitler's suicide, the capture of Berlin, and the complete disintegration of the German military. It marked the official end of the war in Europe. A moment of, well, profound relief and celebration across the Allied world, tempered, of course, by the horrific cost.
It really underscores how each of these turning points, Pearl Harbor bringing in the U.S., Midway and Guadalcanal shifting the Pacific tide, Stalingrad breaking the Wehrmacht in the east, El Alamein securing North Africa, D-Day opening the West, even the grim determination fueled by events like Bataan, they all built on each other.
They absolutely did. It wasn't just one event, but this chain reaction, this cumulative pressure from multiple fronts and strategic shifts that ultimately overwhelmed the Axis powers. Each played its part in paving the path to victory.
It's a lot to take in. This deep dive really shows how these moments dramatically altered the course of the war.
Okay, as we wrap up, maybe some things for our listeners to think about based on all this.
Sure. Maybe consider this.
Yeah.
If you had to pick just one, what do you think was the single most critical turning point against the Axis, and why that specific one over others?
That's a tough one. And how about the Pacific? How effective do you think that island hopping strategy really was in bringing about Japan's defeat?
And maybe think about the connections. How did events in, say, Europe, like the pressure on Germany from D-Day, potentially impact Japan's situation or strategic thinking way over in the Pacific, or vice versa?
Yeah, how did these different theaters influence each other? Lost them all over there.